Last week, EU officials met with UN representatives in Denmark to discuss outsourcing parts of the EU's asylum system to non-EU countries. According to officials, the EU is trying to involve the UN to show that third country schemes, such as the so-called return hubs that Italy is using in Albania to house asylum seekers while their claims are processed, are legally feasible. This comes 2 months after the EU Commission proposed changes to the safe third country concept in its migration pact, which would expand the possibility for member states to use third countries for asylum processing. So in this video, we'll explain the EU's asylum outsourcing plans, and why controversial outsourcing policies are now becoming more popular across the EU. If you're interested in this topic, we have a full article diving deep into migration schemes set up in Albania and El Salvador in the latest issue of our magazine, Too Long. Learn more and pick up a copy by clicking the link in the description. Let's start with the EU's current asylum policy. The EU's Pact on Migration and Asylum was agreed in May 2024, following nearly 4 years of negotiations. It includes policies to expedite screening at borders, introduce clearer rules about which countries are responsible for assessing asylum claims, strengthening the capabilities of border management authorities, and to, quote, embed migration in international partnerships. A few days after it was completed, however, a group of 15 EU interior ministers, reportedly led by Denmark, a long-standing critic of mass migration, which has an opt-out clause of the EU's area of freedom, security and justice, and is therefore not bound by the Migration Pact, wrote a letter to the EU Commission arguing that the bloc needed to think outside the box and find new ways of addressing irregular migration. They call for the EU to establish more comprehensive, mutually beneficial and durable partnerships with key partner countries along the migratory routes, noting the EU's recent multi-million or even billion-euro deals with Turkey, Tunisia and Egypt. And they also described the 2023 Italy-Albania asylum deal, where their asylum claims are processed, as a model for the EU to build on. On top of that, they also suggested exploring place of safety arrangements, involving, quote, rescuing migrants on the high seas and bringing them to a predetermined place of safety in a partner country outside of the EU, and argue that the concept of safe third countries in EU asylum law should be reassessed. Media reports at the time suggested that the letter's large number of signatories, more than half of the EU's 27 member states, meant that asylum outsourcing could soon creep up on the European agenda. Now fast forward to today, and this seems to be exactly what's happening. According to the Financial Times, last week in Copenhagen, EU ministers met with representatives from the UN's International Organization for Migration and its refugee agency, the UNHCR, with the UN bodies outlining their potential roles for running different kinds of centres in non-EU countries. This is quite significant, considering that just over a year ago, when the EU's Migration Pact was finalised, dozens of human rights and civil society organisations criticised the pact for increasing the risk of human rights violations, pushbacks at borders, and refoulement, the forced return of asylum seekers to a country where they could be persecuted. But according to one EU official, the UN is not afraid to participate in the discussions, and 2 options currently being discussed between the EU and UN are return hubs outside of the EU, where people could be taken when their claims fail, and places of safety, where people rescued in the Mediterranean could be taken to centres in North Africa, for example, to be screened and then potentially relocated. The main catalyst for these discussions is Denmark's new role at the head of the EU Council Presidency. On the 1st of July, Denmark took over the rotating 6-month presidency of the Council of the EU, with 2 headline priorities: a secure Europe and a competitive and green Europe. Last week, the Danish immigration minister said that Denmark was determined to reach an agreement on return policy by the end of its presidency in December, with other EU ministers broadly supportive of the proposals. In its official programme, Denmark says it will work on innovative solutions to control irregular migration and reduce arrivals into the EU, specifically by advancing negotiations on the proposals concerning amendment of the concept of safe third country, in order to support a broader use of the rules by member states. For context, in May, the European Commission proposed 4 amendments to the safe third country concept to essentially broaden its applications. Under current rules, EU member states can reject asylum seekers who could have received protection in a safe third country, usually one they pass through on their journey to Europe, provided that authorities can prove connection between the asylum seeker and the third country. With the proposed changes, however, member states wouldn't be required to prove this connection, and if a member state had an agreement with a safe third country, like the UK's now cancelled Rwanda scheme, this would also qualify under the concept, even if the asylum seeker hasn't transited through that country on their way. Now, we should clarify that these changes aren't yet law, as they have to gain the approval of both the EU Council, i.e. the 27 heads of state, and the European Parliament. While most member states reportedly agree with the proposals due to the rising domestic pressures to curb irregular migration and a growing consensus that new solutions are needed, more opposition is expected from the Parliament, particularly from the three left-wing blocs: the Socialists and Democrats, the Greens EFA, and the Left, who traditionally oppose the EU offloading its asylum responsibilities. Human rights groups have also criticised the proposals, with a group of 52 organisations arguing in a joint letter that the EU was seeking to sidestep legal obligations and shift responsibility onto other countries. Ultimately, though, asylum outsourcing does seem to be less taboo than it used to be. While the UK government's now scrapped Rwanda scheme, introduced under the former Conservative government, was widely ridiculed and criticised by both the Council of Europe's Human Rights Commissioner and France's President Emmanuel Macron, who described it as a betrayal of European values, it actually seems to have inspired ongoing discussions about similar deals at the EU level. Other countries that were previously skeptical of outsourcing, such as Germany, now also appear open to it, with Germany's Interior Minister saying earlier this month, protection by the EU does not necessarily have to mean protection in the EU. But even if there is a growing consensus that more creative outsourcing policies are needed, any deals with third countries are likely to be expensive. One report last week suggested that detention hubs set up by Italy and Albania cost 7 times more than the equivalent facilities in Italy. Moreover, because these policies are experimental, there's no evidence yet that they'd actually be effective, and they're unlikely to impact broader migratory trends. Regardless, we're definitely witnessing a shift towards asylum outsourcing, and we can probably expect to see further developments on third country deals and return agreements in the next 6 months. And if you want to know more about this topic, then there's plenty of other outlets reporting on it too. Unfortunately though, every news source has its bias, and no matter how hard each of us try, we'll inevitably miss a story, or worse, only hear half of the story in the first place. And that's where our sponsor Ground News comes in. Ground News is a website and app that collects thousands of articles to help you better understand the world around you, pulling back the curtain on media bias. For example, this story about Denmark pushing for stricter EU migration policies has been covered by more than 43 sources. We know that more than 6 of these have been reported on the left, while 5 have been reported from the right. Every story also comes with a detailed view of the bias distribution, factuality scores, and even specific ownership information. But my favourite part of the app and website is the aptly named blind spot feed. It presents you with stories and articles that haven't been reported on one side of the aisle or the other. For instance, if you lean right, you might miss this story about the Scottish National Party threatening to force a vote in the UK Parliament on recognising Palestine. When it comes to blind spots, it's not just about discovering different stories though, it's also about discovering just how political bias frames the stories themselves. Having a tool that helps you to spot this and helps you take action is a real game changer. It's no secret that here at TLDR News, we're constantly thankful for Ground News. It's such an incredibly useful platform that captures information that you just can't get anywhere else, and keeps you informed in a media landscape that's constantly trying to attract your attention and sway you towards or away from certain political viewpoints. If you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan by using the link in the description, or by scanning the QR code on screen. This offer is only available here, so make sure that you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.